presentation of the colors and playing of the national anthem. Thank you. The West Marshall High School Band will now play a medley of all 5 service songs, Armed Forces Salute by Bob Loudon. If you or a member of your family has served in our country's military, please stand and be recognized as your branch's song is played. The United States Army.
morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2019 Veterans Day program at West Marshall High School. First and foremost, I want to begin today by recognizing all those among us who have been a part of a great brotherhood and sisterhood we call the United States military. Our veterans, active duty service members, guardsmen, and reservists. It is your service and sacrifice that has kept our country safe and free. If you're able to stand, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. No matter which branch you served in, whether your job path or how many years you served, raising your hand and committing yourself to the service in the military was a brave and selfless act. One that resulted in few guarantees of where you'd be assigned, whether and where you might deploy, and in some cases, if you would return home. Thanks to those who have served and those who continue to serve today, America can sleep peacefully at night. Military men and women know the risks, but they accept them in many cases so that others won't have to. Before we start our program, I'd like to mention some of our staff members and their connections to the military. I will start with Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson was in the Army Guard for 12 years and the Air Guard for 16 years for a total of 28 years of military service. Mr. Ferguson started teaching at West Marshall in 2000, and while in the Guard, he was deployed from 2005 and 2006 in Iraq. He never makes mention of his service, and most would not realize the type of danger he was in while deployed, as he was driving trucks and transporting goods in hostile enemy territory, dodging road mines and snipers. Mr. Ferguson missed an entire year of school while serving for our country. At the time he was deployed, his children were 6 and 4. Mr. Ferguson recently retired from the National Guard in 2014 from his service. Let us give Mr. Ferguson a warm round of applause for his service. Chris grew up in Marshalltown and after high school joined the United States Army. He spent 5 years on active duty in the Army and earned the rank of Staff Sergeant. His tours included the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard in Fort Myer, Virginia, and the 130th Attack Battalion in Al-Basra, Iraq. Chris was in Iraq for 10 months, and his main job in Iraq was communications. Upon completion of his military service, Chris received his undergraduate degree from Iowa State University in 2012 and graduated from the University of Iowa College of Law with distinction in 2015. Currently, Christopher Wurzberger is an attorney in the Marshalltown area. Let us give Mr. Wurzberger a round of applause for his service to our country. Thompson joined the Army National Guard in 2009 when he was a junior at Gladbrook Rhinebeck High School. His job is an 88 Mike, which is a truck driver, and gained the rank as sergeant in 2015. He is currently the leader of the gun track squad in his unit. Tanner graduated with a bachelor's degree in natural resource management from Upper Iowa University. He is currently employed by the Iowa Department of Natural Resources at the Otter Creek Marsh in Chelsea. Let us give Mrs. Thompson a round of applause for Tanner Thompson's service. This will be Tanner's 10th year of service to our country. I will now introduce you to our special guests today. Today we have honored guests from the Korean era, the post-Korean era, the Vietnam era, and a veteran who served in the Middle East. Today we honor these soldiers and tell the stories of their service. I'm very humbled and honored to bring these hometown heroes to our school today. When West Marshall put out a Facebook post and an email about our program, I had Bailey Tompkins' mother deliver some pictures and discharge documents to the school. I talked her into having her grandfather be honored today. Unfortunately, he could not be here today because of the inclement weather. There are some phone calls and help with some family members. Fred Sidoris is going to be honored today. Fred told me he wanted to be honored because of Bailey, his great-granddaughter. Fred grew up in the Baxter and the Winterset area. He was one of 12 children. He has an older brother, Homer, who was stationed in the front lines in Germany during World War II. Fred was drafted at the age of 22. He left for basic training on March 12th of 1952. His brother Harold, the youngest, left in July of that same year. Fred attended basic training at Fort Bliss, Texas, and stayed there for 16 weeks. While in service, he was trained as an airplane mechanic and worked on airplanes. Fred's assignment was to work with a motor pool. The definition of a motor pool is a group of vehicles used for a particular purpose and dispatched when needed. During times of war and times of peace, military personnel are assigned jobs. All of these jobs are important to the work of the operations of the United States military. Fred was in Edgewood, Maryland. This particular site is important as it is an important radar unit for the United States security, both during the Korean conflict and today. The Korean War was going on during the time of Fred's enlistment. A short history lesson is as follows. Although Korea was not strategic to the United States entered the war because the United States did not want to appear soft on communism. They also wanted to protect Japan, which they considered to be strategic. The situation today in Korea is similar to what it was 60 plus years ago after the war. It was estimated that around 2.5 million were killed or wounded during this war. Around 40,000 United States soldiers died in the war. The civilian casualties were especially high, with estimates of around 2 million civilians being killed. For some perspective, the TV show MASH was set during the Korean War. For many people in my age group, when we watched it as children and teenagers in the 80s, it gave us some perspective of what the war was like for the soldiers. Our very own Vicki Messina, who's running the lights, thank you, Vicki, his father was in Korea. The Korean-era soldiers are now in their upper 80s. It is important to remember and honor these veterans. If you see a Korean veteran with a Korean War hat, please thank them for their service. Fred said that the Army did him good. During the time he was in the Army, he did not like it, but as he reflects back, he feels that it was something that put his life on track. Fred returned home to Winterset and worked as a mechanic until the mid-80s. He was married in 1957 to his wife, Charlotte, and they had 4 children, Shelley, Martin, Blaney, and Julie. At the present time, Fred lives in Grimes. I went to visit Fred on Saturday, and he was geared up to watch the Hawks play. Is there any Hawkeye fans in the house? When asked about advice that Fred would give to young people, and I just love this, he said, throw the damn phones away and start using your mind. Talk to people, look them in the eye, and communicate. Not only is this good advice for young people, it's good advice for all of us in this room. Talk to people, look them in the eye, and communicate. At this time, I'll have Bailey Tompkins come forward to get her great-grandfather's plaque in recognition for your service. Come on up, Bailey. On behalf of West Marshall High School, I present this award. Cliff Shaper is a West Marshall favorite. Cliff and Lucy Shaper attend many West Marshall events. In fact, last year at the Iowa State Girls Basketball Tournament, Cliff and Lucy Shaper were presented the Iowa Girls Athletic Association Sportsmanship Award. This is an award given to the best fans with the best heart and character. I can't think of a better way to describe Cliff and Lucy Shaper, 2 of the best with the best heart and the best character. I am so pleased to be honoring Cliff Shaper here today. Cliff is a 1955 graduate of State Center High School. He grew up on a farm north of town where his son Ted and his family live today. In his class, there were 31 people. There were 17 boys in his class, and out of the 17, 8 of the boys went to service. During that time, Cliff volunteered for the draft. He was stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado for 8 weeks, and then stationed at Fort Ord, California. After his training, he was stationed at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which is about 30 miles west of Boston. Cliff was trained to be a combat engineer. In his mission, he was trained to build bridges and bridges for heavy artillery equipment in advance of foot soldiers in the event of war. Cliff was also in transportation during his military service. After his mission in Fort Devens, Cliff was stationed in Watertown, New York, where he assisted and trained the National Guard Reserves. His most vivid memory was the amount of snow that was there at that time. During the time that Cliff served, the United States was in peaceful times, perhaps the best thing one could hope for while one is in service. Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. Eisenhower continued New Deal agencies and signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and sent Army troops to enforce federal court orders which integrated schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. His largest program was the interstate highway system, which has a tremendous impact on travel throughout the United States. He promoted the establishment of a strong science education after Sputnik. Sputnik was a satellite that was launched by the Russians that prompted American education to beef up science and math expectations. I bring this up because Cliff has marveled at the pace of technology that the military has kept through the years. He is particularly interested in drones and remembers some of the early drones during his military career. Cliff was married to Lucy in 1963. They had 4 children, Carla, Lynette, Mickey, and Ted. Carla graduated from ISU and later earned her master's degree at sunny Buffalo, New York. She is a BOM in the Edward Jones office in Huxley. Lynette did her undergraduate work for the civil engineer at Colorado State and her master's in Berkeley, California. She has been with the Army Corps of Engineers. She has trained Air Force recruits in Colorado Springs. Mickey attended North Dakota State University at Grand Forks and received both her BA and master's there. Mickey is a commercial pilot and a flight instructor. The youngest, Ted, graduated from West Marshall in 1992. Upon graduation, Ted joined the Air Force. Ted was a crew chief on a KC-10 and was stationed both at the McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey and Shreveport, Louisiana. While in the Air Force, he was married to Stacy, and they are the parents of Alex, Kyle, Renee, and Sam. Cliff and Lucy have been great members of our West Marshall community. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me honor Cliff Shaper. Presenting this award will be Renee and Sam Shaper. Renee is a senior and Sam is a freshman here at West Marshall. Congratulations, Cliff. Let's give him another round of applause. Our next veteran is Charles Chuck Nichols. Chuck is 89 years old and is actively farming north of town. Chuck was one of 8 children. Chuck is a graduate of Rhodes High School. He graduated in 1947 with 14 other students. After high school, Chuck attended Iowa State University and was in ROTC training. The ROTC is the Reserve Officers Training Corps. It is a group of college and university-based officer training programs for training commissioned officers for the United States Armed Forces. Chuck graduated in 1952 from Iowa State and was assigned to Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan. He worked on F-86 squadron airplanes. He was stationed in Labrador, which is in the northernmost geographical region in Atlantic Canada. While in Labrador, Chuck's mission was to intercept unknown aircraft to protect the United States and Canada during the Korean conflict. While in Labrador, Chuck remembers there being 180 inches of snow. All mail was delivered by parachute and dropped to the service people stationed in Labrador. The military has many missions. Its primary missions, of course, is to defend the United States and U.S. interests. In peaceful times and in war, service people are stationed all over the world. The mission that Chuck was on was very important for national security reasons. Chuck was the adjunct personnel officer under the Commander General. Chuck was stationed in Labrador for a year until the Korean conflict came to a close. Chuck remained as a reserve officer until he was 65 years old, but was never called back to service. After serving, Chuck came back to Iowa and settled in the Eldora area. Chuck and his wife had row crops, cattle, hogs, and chickens. He had a couple milk cows and eggs and creams that helped with the groceries. After 8 years of farming, Chuck took a job with the Federal Land Bank. Chuck had a very impressive career in the banking industry. Chuck worked with farmers with the selling of land for most of his career. During his career, he saw the high highs of the 70s and the low lows of the 80s during the farm crisis. He was the field man in Iowa City, was the manager of Federal Land Bank in Hampton, where he lived for many years, and the superintendent for Federal Land Bank of Northeast Iowa, overseeing 10 bank locations. Chuck also worked for Breton Bank in Marshalltown, and as of the last 41 years, he has farmed on Main Street Road, just north of town. When asked if he were to give advice to young people, he said, "Work hard to do what's right. Love the Lord. Always do the best you can for your family." Chuck has a very special connection with West Marshall. Chuck's granddaughter is our Trojan Tots preschool teacher, Danielle Junker. Danielle is going to come forward and present Chuck with her award. Ladies and gentlemen, let us give a round of applause for Mr. Chuck Nichols. Keith Smith was born in Napa, Idaho, and graduated from Ottumwa High School in 1967. After high school, Keith was not sure what he wanted to do and couldn't afford college. He had an uncle who was from the Marshalltown area, and he encouraged him to work for Fisher Controls. He decided to start working and then received his draft notice. During that time, and even today, all 18-year-old males need to sign up for selective service. If the Department of Defense needs soldiers, young men are called up for the draft. After Keith received his draft notice, he enlisted in the Marines rather than be drafted. Keith was sent to San Diego for boot camp, and then to Camp Pendleton, and then to Okinawa, Japan. While in Okinawa, which is an important military base for global protection of the United States, Keith heard there was another soldier from Conrad, Iowa. This soldier's name was Jim Pence. Keith and Jim hit it off right away as they shared a love of cars, and they became good friends. Jim got the notice that he was going to be deployed to the 1st Marine Air Wing in Vietnam. Jim left for his mission, but never came back. He died in a helicopter crash. Jim is honored on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. Name inscribed in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall, panel 15W, line 104. Keith describes Vietnam as being very hot and humid with tons of mosquitoes. Fighting in Vietnam was nothing like fighting in Europe during World War II. Dense jungles, mosquitoes, heat, and malaria made progress difficult. Viet Cong soldiers could hide in villages, attack, and disappear. Fields were full of booby traps and mines, and hundreds of miles of tunnels ran under villages, allowing enemy soldiers to escape quickly. Keith was trained to do motor transport, but instead was put on guard duty from dusk until dawn, protecting the perimeter. He would also be tasked to be the security person to protect convoy supplies on the lead truck. He said that he did not think of the day-to-day dangers because he was young, but he really thought about his safety during his last 30 days of service and worried that he would not return home. Upon Keith's return from Vietnam, he boarded a plane to land at the Los Angeles International Airport. In flight, the plane was diverted to an Air Force base for landing. It was diverted because there was a mob of angry protesters who were going to meet the soldiers and harass them for their involvement in the Vietnam War. The plane full of soldiers were very upset by this and were told by their commanders that they couldn't have angry Marines getting into a riot with protesters. This action avoided news media and was meant to detract attention. At that time, troops did not receive a hero's welcome home. After Vietnam, troops were often blamed or humiliated for their participation in the war effort. Americans were confused and angry over the United States' participation in the Vietnam conflict. How we name and define this most controversial of American wars is still a great source of debate and was a very dark time in American history. Keith expressed numerous times during our meeting that he was so glad that soldiers are treated with respect today when they get home from their service. Keith worked for Fisher Controls as an electrician. After 37 years, he was brought back as a contract employee to keep a multi-million-dollar machine operational. During the time that Keith was at Fisher's, he was an electrician and troubleshooted machines that were not operational. Later in his career, he was sent to Germany to learn about a machine that would produce millions of dollars of revenue for Fisher's, and worked with German engineers in the assembly and operation of this machine in the Marshalltown plant. He was a lifelong learner and a master of his craft. He now lives in Melbourne and loves his classic cars and street rods. Keith encourages young people to take vocational classes. His welding and electricity classes that he took in high school has always been part of his skill set. Keith also encourages people to look at the military as there's numerous opportunities for skills. He says the military is a country all of its own where you can be an electrician, plumber, fireman, police officer, or medical personnel. When asked, what kind of advice would you give to young people, Keith says, do your job, do what you're supposed to do, and do it well. As Keith reflects back on his time in Vietnam, he recently bought a pair of Skechers shoes that were made in Vietnam. He was blown away by this because yesterday's jungle and political unrest is now an economic powerhouse. It is hard to believe that a jungle with grass huts has been replaced with modern cities and development. Keith is now 70 years old. He is married and has been retired from Fisher since 2004. Keith has 2 daughters, Leslie and Lori, and is the grandpa of Taylor and Tia Brown. Taylor is a junior at Iowa State, and Tia is a sophomore here at West Marshall. She is the reason that he is here today. He agreed to share his experiences with our school because of Tia. Keith also shared with me that this was the most he had ever talked about his experiences in Vietnam. Thank you for sharing your story, Keith. It is important to know our American history. And at this time, I would like to welcome Tia to present her grandfather, Keith Smith, with a recognition plaque. Ladies and gentlemen, Keith Smith. Our final veteran is a young man by the name of Tyson Mullenbeck. I became acquainted with Tyson when he emailed me to spread the word of his flight training schools that he was offering in the Marshalltown area. I quickly countered with inviting him to our career fair last spring because I thought that a pilot would be a really cool thing. And as many of you know, I'm a big pain and I find my opportunities. And he actually came and he did a really great job. I was intrigued by Tyson, and I'm glad that I've had the chance to meet a young person with such great perspective. Tyson Mullenbeck is from Hampton, Iowa. He went to the University of Iowa and was part of the ROTC program. Coincidentally, Tyson and Chuck both lived in Hampton, Iowa, and both were ROTC officers. Chuck at Iowa State. Again, any Iowa State fans? And Tyson from the University of Iowa. Any Hawk fans? Also, coincidentally, during the Iowa State game, Iowa did win. So you got to cast your pennies next time, Iowa State people. Okay. Tyson graduated from the University of Iowa in 2006 as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. His first mission was in California, where he worked with nuclear missile training. Nuclear weapons are a long-standing deterrent to American enemies. In fact, there are 450 nuclear weapon sites in the state of Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, Nebraska, and Northern California. These sites must be maintained, are important to the national security in the United States. The United States has a nuclear triad of air, water, and intercontinental ballistic missiles, which is a guided ballistic missile, which can travel 3,400 miles, designed for nuclear weapons delivery. Tyson was trained as a launch controller of these weapons. Fortunately, the last time a nuclear weapon was fired was during the final stages of World War II in 1945. After his training in California, Tyson was sent to Montana and then to Qatar. Qatar is located in the Middle East. Qatar is bordered by the Persian Gulf and Saudi Arabia to the south. The United States and Qatar have been key allies for decades with close military and economic ties. Qatar is ranked as the 16th safest place in the world and is one of the richest countries in the universe because of its natural gas. While in Qatar, Tyson was a Space Command launch officer. He put government and commercial satellites into air and tracked and identified threats from space. He also worked with pilots that were in Korea, Nevada, in the United States, as they were flying drones in the region from Nevada. His main mission was to protect a data link between pilots and drones flying in Afghanistan. Tyson remarked that America is not always at war. In fact, the best you can hope for is not to be at war. The United States military exists to serve American people, to protect political interests abroad, and to serve protections for countries who cannot protect themselves. While at the University of Iowa, Tyson would wear his uniform 3 days a week as an ROTC officer. He was on active duty for 8 years. Tyson received a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Iowa. Upon his arrival in California, he was encouraged to earn his master's degree while in the military. The military also paid for his flight training. Tyson has high regard for the military, and he says that most military personnel works from 9 to 5. Tyson says that it's a great opportunity to start school while you're in the military. Tyson is a flight instructor giving lessons in the Marshalltown area, and he is a corporate pilot. Tyson flies clients in a private plane. His clients fly privately to avoid the hassle of the airlines and to have on-demand service to wherever they wish to go. He flies out of the Newton and Marshalltown Airport. Many people do not realize the global presence Marshalltown, Iowa has with companies like Emerson, Lennox, and Swift. Tyson flies over 600 hours a year. When asked what advice he would share with young people, Tyson said, "Don't limit yourself to the four corners of Iowa. Take every opportunity to pursue your interests. If your passion is art, look at going to an art school in Chicago. Pursue your interests and don't do what everyone else is doing." Tyson is married to his wife, Rainey, and they have 2 children. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tyson Molenbeek. I would like to talk a little bit about James Rolsgaard. For those of you who went to the musical this past weekend, it was phenomenal. He was the lead. He put this on Facebook this morning. To all service members, no matter what branch currently serving or have served, NCO or officers, living or in heaven above, thank you for your service and sacrifice to our great country, the United States of America. You are the reason that 99% of the American population can live in freedom that we oh so pride very much. I hope that I can offer my service as the years go on in the National Guard career. Until then, here's a salute and thank you to all Armed Service Force members. Happy Veterans Day. Ladies and gentlemen, James Rolsgaard. I have a very dear friend of mine that is sitting in the back row, and his name is Ray Frohwein. Ray Frohwein, can you stand up? Ray Frohwein. Honored at our program numerous times. He's 95 years old. He told me that he was the oldest veteran here. He might be the oldest, but he's still the best looking, right? Am I right, everybody? Yeah. Ray fought in World War II. Thank you so much for your service, Ray. Not only has Ray been a Legion member for many, many years and the longest member of our Legion here in State Center, but he's also a wonderful community member and a beloved person. You might see him in the summertime riding on his golf cart to go visit his wife, Ruth. And so congratulations and thank you, Ray, for coming. Let's give Ray a nice round of applause. I'd also like Larry Carlson to stand up at this time. Larry Carlson served during 1963 through 1965. He was stationed in Nuremberg, Germany during the Vietnam War era. Larry Carlson was a radio operator. And I was a little late to the game, but next year we'll get his full story and we'll honor him next year. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Larry Carlson. Take a few minutes to honor and congratulate a regular fixture around our community, Chief Jeff Bunn. Although Chief Bunn is not a veteran, he is someone who has served the West Marshall community for many years, and on behalf of the West Marshall community, we wanted to take a moment out of our program to properly thank you for a career well served. Chief Bunn grew up in Sacramento, California. While in high school, Chief Bunn was part of a training program where he learned the trade of firefighting. He did this for 2 years and started his career as a resident firefighter medic. After his training in EMS and firefighting, Jeff went to law enforcement until 1993 and then came to Iowa after meeting his wife, Sammy, who is from Central Iowa. He worked in Toledo as an officer until 1998. Those of you who have been around the State Center area for a long time remember Jake Osgood. Jake Osgood was a wonderful town cop. Jake was diagnosed with MS and was no longer able to work. Jake called Jeff and told him to apply for the job, and since 1998, Jeff has been in State Center. That one phone call changed the trajectory of his career as Jeff was planning on joining the force in Grinnell. In a community the size of State Center, a police officer wears many hats, and each day is different. On any given shift, an officer may be sitting outside of the school parking lot, trying to slow down teenagers from driving too fast, or I heard this morning doing donuts. Yes, you can't do, guys, you can't do donuts, okay. Okay, you can't do it, it's not good, okay. An officer, sorry about that. That was Jeff's favorite job, was to sit out, wasn't it? That was your favorite job. That's everybody's favorite job, okay. An officer might take a complaint of a dog doing their business on someone's lawn, TPing around town during homecoming, and in the darkest days responding to fatal car accidents, fires, burglaries, child endangerment, domestic disputes, and even homicides. The job is very consuming, not only professionally, but personally. Jeff has seen the very best in people, and Jeff has seen people during their worst days under the worst circumstances. What has made it worthwhile has been the students and the community members. Jeff's connections with our West Marshall students have been invaluable in his position as chief officer of the Rose Capital of Iowa. Jeff remembers in his early career directing traffic during Rose Festival, and he knew he was in when the kids from the high school lured him to their group, only to find that he was compelled with water balloons. Jeff has made his presence known at our school as a resource. His relationship with the school has been a strong relationship that, in his words, have been worthwhile. Jeff has 4 children, Josh, Travis, Nate, and James. His stepson, James Rolsgaard, is a senior at West Marshall. Both James and his brother, Nate, are members of the National Guard. Thank you, James and Nate, for your service. Let us give a round of applause for these 2 young men. Jeff and his wife, Misty, reside in State Center. At age 55 years young, Jeff retires from the post of State Center. His career has spanned 21 years in the same community, which is very rare in rural communities. In Jeff's next chapter, Jeff Bunn, officer number 351, will be mentoring new police officers and will be training EMS and police officers on trauma-based care. Join me in congratulations to Officer Bunn. On behalf of the West Marshall community, please accept this golden apple as a small token of our appreciation for a career well spent. And James is going to be presenting that. Ladies and gentlemen, students and staff, thank you for making this a special day for our veterans. Veterans and community members, please go to the library for a reception at the conclusion of our program. And thank you all for coming out. This morning at 6 o'clock, Mr. Einsweiler and I were texting back and forth what we're going to do about the Veterans Day program. I know that the roads weren't very good, but looks like I saw an email that kids can get to school when they want to. And I'm thinking, does that mean that they're going to get to school like at 2 o'clock? But look at, you're all here, so that's a really great thing. So thank you for braving the weather, and congratulations to all of our veterans.
All right, I want to first thank all the veterans who were able to join us and your families. It really makes this day special. Thank you for your service. And then I also wanted to thank Mrs. Ether for all the hard work in putting this together, getting people here, communicating with the community, and setting this up. So special round of applause to Mrs. Ether for setting this up. Students, as you leave, there are 3 exits for you.